Alisa Yelchin. A grandfather and his grandson went squirrel hunting on September 10, 1987, in the woods off of Liberty Road 22100, close to Mount Hope Cemetery in Youngstown, Ohio. Unfortunately, the finding of a human skull and other bones resting on the surface ended their time spent bonding. After being dispatched to the area, the Youngstown Police Department launched an investigation to identify the remains. The investigators were assisted by the Department of Anthropology at Youngstown State University. They were able to ascertain that the remains most likely belonged to a black male who was between the ages of 30 and 44, and who had maybe spent 3 to 5 years in those forests. Sadly, no more evidence was found, and no leads materialized, therefore the case was closed. They called the unidentified man the Youngstown John Doe. A young woman wanted to talk to investigators at the Youngstown Police Department, so she called in August of 2021. You can call her Alisa Yelchin. She recalls viewing the skull and bones in the lab while she was an anthropology student in the early 2000s. The idea that the Youngstown John Doe was someone's child was one that Alisa could not shake. Her intention was to guarantee that the Youngstown Police Department persisted with the investigation and exerted all necessary effort to conclude it. Following that, Detective Sergeant David P. Sweeney assumed command of the case. The remains were submitted to the Ohio Attorney General's Bureau of Criminal Investigation in late 2021 so that DNA could be extracted. Next, a fresh facial reconstruction was made, and the Youngstown John Doe was added to NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Additionally, Detective Sergeant Sweeney circulated leaflets and solicited tips around the city. At that point, it was decided to transfer some of the remains to Othram Inc. to see if they could help with the investigation and provide fresh clues. The Othram team informed the Youngstown Police Department in January 2023 that funding was available for the case through the Porchlight Project. Established in 2018, the Porchlight Project is a privately funded nonprofit that provides advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy assistance to agencies, mostly in Ohio. Using forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram was able to successfully extract DNA from the skeletal remains and create a thorough DNA profile fit for genealogical study. After the leads were sent back to law enforcement, investigator Sergeant Sweeney, the Mahoning County Coroner's Office, and BCI conducted more investigation on them. This confirmed the identification of Youngstown John Doe that the genetic genealogy study had shown. The identity of Robert Earl Sanders as the Youngstown John Doe was revealed in February of 2023. 11 years had passed since his disappearance on August 13, 1976, when his bones were discovered in the forest. Robert passed away at the age of just 23. Speaking at the news conference was Alisa Yelchin, the anthropology student who initiated the case. All of us have encountered someone who makes an impression on us. You simply cannot forget them, their countenance, their demeanor, whatever they may be. I first encountered my person in a forensic anthropology class at the beginning of 2000. But instead of sitting beside me, he was in front of me looking like he belonged in a lost and found box, and he had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. It had always eluded me who he was. It bothered me to wonder what he looked like. It is recommended that anyone with information on Robert Earl Sanders call the Youngstown Police Department at 330-742-8900. Moving on to the next case. Barbara Faye Villarreal. The community of Garland, Texas, saw a negative transformation in November 1986. Her husband discovered Barbara Faye Villarreal's lifeless body. Despite extensive inquiry, no clues were found, and the case was closed. Before someone Barbara knew well was arrested in this case, more than 3 decades would pass. Barbara Faye Villarreal was raised in the rural areas of Indiana as a member of a large, close-knit family. She enjoyed a straightforward and contented upbringing, swimming in the neighboring lake and riding her bicycle to her grandparents' corner store to buy lollipops. She is described as perfect, intelligent, compassionate, and sweet by a close friend. From her mother's marriage to her father, who died when she was only a few years old, she was the youngest of 4 children. After divorcing, her mother had 2 additional children. With so many relatives, Barbara's large family was her home for most Sundays and holidays. She enjoyed spending time with her Pomeranian, Cammy, and sharing recipes with her family. Officers from the Garland Police Department responded to a disturbance report at a residence in the 36-100 block of Colbath Street on November 7, 1986. When they got there, they discovered 27-year-old Barbara Faye Villarreal's lifeless body in one of her home's back rooms. Her several stab wounds claimed her life. The big kitchen knife was discovered close to her body, according to police. Domingo Diaz Villarreal, her 32-year-old spouse, was taken into custody on suspicion of killing that evening. Following their interrogation, the police declared him not to be a suspect in the crime. There was something wrong with his wife, he told the neighbors, and he had found her deceased. He requested them to call the police. After being removed from the scene, DNA evidence was added to the CODIS database. 2 years later, in 1988, her husband was shot and killed in Mexico. Then the cops found out that Jesus Canales was truly his real name. The FBI and Garland police investigators pursued a number of leads over the years in both the U.S. and Mexico, but the case was unsolved for many years. The suspect was identified in 2023 by the Garland Police Department using cutting-edge technology, such as DNA genealogy. The 85-year-old brother of Barbara Canales, Liberio Canales, had DNA that matched that taken from the site. One Canales family member's DNA was found in an open database. Canales was known to reside at a house in the city, according to the Lovington Police Department in New Mexico. According to the agency, Canales entered New Mexico after crossing the border from Mexico to spend his birthday with family. On July 18, 2023, Lovington Police Department put Canales into jail without any problems. After that, he was charged with taking someone's life and placed under arrest at the Lea County Detention Center on a federal warrant. Detectives claim that Canales confessed to killing Barbara because of a family argument while he was being held. A $1,000 bond has been posted for him. According to court documents, on August 18th, Canales was placed into the Dallas County Jail after being extradited back to Texas. In a statement, the police department expressed gratitude to the Lovington, New Mexico Police Department, the Lea County Sheriff's Office, and the Dallas FBI Violent Crimes Task Force for their assistance in resolving the cold case and providing closure for Barbara Faye's family. Now that Barbara's death was unexpected, her family can finally come to terms with what happened and start the healing process. The Barbara Villarreal case serves as a powerful reminder of the intricacies of family relationships and the long-lasting effects of unsolved fatalities. It also emphasizes how crucial it is to keep going after justice no matter how much time has gone. Not only is Barbara's lawsuit resolved, but her legacy lives on in the affection and memories of those she left behind. Canales was given a 20-year prison sentence in a Texas prison on March 12, 2024. Barbara's family delivered a powerful letter shortly before Canales was taken away, saying that they would never again allow him to consume their thoughts and that they should always view his existence as a blessing. Inside the courtroom, Canales was admonished by Jennifer Dunderman, Barbara's sister-in-law. "You spent 37 years living your life as if nothing had happened. You not only stole Barb's life, but also a small portion of everyone she was acquainted with." Mark Dunderman, Barbara's brother, stated the following: "Still, nothing truly changes as a result. Even though our sister is still missing, it's good to have closure." According to Leighton D'Antoni, the head prosecutor for Dallas County, they might have committed some evil deeds in the past. They are aware that they will eventually meet their maker. That does, in my opinion, assist people in admitting guilt and accepting responsibility. At 93, Barbara's mother is still living. She placed a great deal of importance on living to witness the day when her daughter's killer is found guilty. Moving on to the next case. Dorothy Thomas. Dorothy Thomas, a stunning brunette who was 27 years old, was described as a kind, compassionate, and diligent woman. She was well respected in her community and well known for her devotion and kind disposition. But on September 6, 1957, Dorothy's life took an unexpected turn. Clarence Rames, the Coca-Cola delivery man, found her in a dry cleaner's washroom at 9:04 a.m. After discovering the building to be unoccupied, Clarence looked closer and noticed Dorothy's legs poking through the open bathroom door. He thought she had fainted at first, but then he noticed she was laying in a pool of blood. Dorothy suffered nearly 20 knife wounds to her head and neck, which resulted in deadly blood loss, according to an autopsy. The first focus of the investigation was her husband, Kenneth Thomas. His whereabouts on the morning of the killing were described in his alibi, which was substantiated by numerous credible witnesses. After his dry cleaning was discovered on the dry cleaner's counter, Harry Barth was elevated to the status of prime suspect. Barth's name was crossed out in the cleaner's master log, indicating that he had previously picked up his garments. There was no cash missing from the open register, indicating that Dorothy was likely in the middle of a transaction when she was attacked. Footprints were discovered in the mud at the back of the establishment, and drag marks led from the front counter to the loo. Harry Barth said he had a terrible headache and was unable to get out of bed when the police initially attempted to speak with him. When they went back a few days later, they found a pair of white sneakers with mud on them under his bed, but Barth denied ever possessing them. Barth said that he had used the toilet the day before, so his fingerprints might be in there. He also offered an alibi for the morning of September 6, 1957. Barth made a number of damning remarks during his interviews, including the possibility that he killed Dorothy and the fact that he frequently has blackouts or loses his temper because of excruciating migraines. He hinted that he could confess and urged the cops not to question his wife. Barth's alibi could not be verified by witnesses. There appeared to be an attempt to sway the investigation when the babysitter disclosed that Barth had instructed her to fabricate the time he picked up his child. Barth remained the major suspect even though there was insufficient proof to establish a direct connection between him and the crime. Barth was the subject of a July 1974 investigation by the Nebraska-Lincoln Police Department. This came after it was discovered that she had been with Blanche Klaus just before her death by drowning. Despite Barth's denial, there was strong circumstantial evidence to suggest otherwise. The Tallahassee Police Department, TPD, received assistance from the FBI in 1997 for more investigations. Regretfully, no solid proof was discovered to connect Barth to either crime. Senior Assistant State Attorney Robert Cummings wrote Chief Assistant State Attorney Warren Goodwin a memo in 1999 about Harry Barth's role in the case. Cummings suggested that the case be closed because prosecution was not possible in the absence of a complete confession. Furthermore, it would be pointless to look for witnesses to the events on September 6, 1957. Chief ASA Goodwin, however, insisted that the investigation continue until the death of the key suspect. It has been verified by recent investigations that Harry Barth died in Cary, North Carolina on October 23, 2019, from thyroid cancer. He worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for many years as a chemist responsible for quality assurance and food safety. His certificate and an interview with his daughter, Lynn Fisher, served as proof of this information. Detectives established probable cause to believe that Barth was responsible for Dorothy's death after the task team reviewed the case. It is now appropriate to close the matter in light of the information at hand, Chief ASA Goodwin's prior recommendation, and Barth's passing in 2019. Her town has been plagued by Dorothy Thomas's terrible death for many years. In-depth investigations were conducted, yet justice was never done. Following the death of the main suspect, Harry Barth, in 2019, the investigation was declared closed as of 2024. Dorothy was a light that went out too soon, but her generosity and devotion will live on. Detective Mark Ray then made 2 different phone calls after the TPD ultimately closed the case. He was able to inform Dorothy's great-nephew, who resides out of state, that his aunt's case has been closed over the phone. The phone call, he claimed, was relieving. It's always a nice thing to offer some closure. He also gave Barth's daughter a call, to which she answered more incredulously. He gave her a callback option in case she had any questions, but he hasn't received a response. Moving on to the next case. Dujuan Sims. Possibly one of the most heartbreaking, unresolved cases in Michigan's history is the disappearance of 4-year-old Dujuan Christian Sims. It is also full with unsolved questions, conjecture, and rumors. On December 11, 1994, Dwayne vanished from sight. He disappeared somewhere along the hallway between the Target store and the main portion of the mall at around 2:30 p.m., according to his mother, Dwayne. The two had visited the Wonderland Mall in Livonia together. Not much else is known regarding the precise events surrounding Dujuan's disappearance. The moment investigators heard Duana's account, they became skeptical. Shortly after the disappearance, they gave Duana 2 polygraph exams, and she failed both of them. It is important to remember that most courts do not accept the results of so-called lie detector tests, and they are not infallible. Nevertheless, authorities think Duana had a problem. They have expressed their belief that Duana was never in the mall on multiple occasions. Following her son's disappearance, Duana was interrogated for 18 hours, and her home and car were searched in vain. Not a single one of the center's 12 CCTV cameras captured the 4-year-old. Duana allegedly pointed to a mother and child and exclaimed, "That's me and Dwayne," when she saw the video. However, this was later proven to be untrue because Duana and her son's attire did not match the pair's. The young woman was seen by witnesses entering alone at approximately 3:30 p.m., and according to some sources, this was also recorded on CCTV. In the decades that have passed since the 4-year-old disappeared, Duana has remained innocent. She revealed to the public in 1995 that she had started going to therapy sessions to assist her deal with her son's abduction. Duana had been emotionally traumatized by the incident, according to her mother. She added that although Duana was unaware of it, she held a life insurance policy on him. She stated she had planned to use the funds to assist Duan with future college expenses. Concurrently, Duan's father, who has been mainly absent from most media coverage of the case and seems to have maintained a low profile since his son's abduction, passed a polygraph test given by police authorities. He informed investigators he thought Duana was a decent mother and had never been treated as a suspect. The police search abandoned buildings, train tracks, family residences, dumpsters, and other waste receptacles in addition to other locations. They utilized sniffer dogs, ATVs, and foot searches. Over 1,200 tips were looked into by a multi-agency task group. According to one of them, Duam is still alive and resides in Florida. Even so, there has never been a trace of him. A tip from another law enforcement agency in 1999 prompted the police to excavate a section of Dearborn Heights, Michigan's Hines Park. They discovered a buried sack of bones here. DNA analysis, however, demonstrated that the remains were not Dwayne's. The 4-year-old was ruled out as a possible match, but for a brief while the same year, it was believed that he was Dennis, the DeKalb County Jane Doe who had been discovered in a Georgia cemetery. The Wonderland Mall was dismantled at the beginning of 2000. Although the locals thought Dujuan's remains would be discovered among the debris, they were never discovered. A man by the name of Mike Cash went to the Livonia police in 2019 thinking he was the missing toddler and gave a sample of his DNA. Through his Facebook posts, Cash expressed his belief that he was Dujuan Sims, which is how the authorities first discovered about him. In addition, he said that his parents had misled him about a number of areas of his childhood. Cash allegedly contacted Dujuana before, but she banned him when he allegedly refused to respond to inquiries regarding his birthday or the birthmarks he would have if he were really her son. Dujuana expressed discomfort with the suggestion made by the authorities for the two to meet. She did, however, provide her own DNA and appeared to assist with the inquiry. But since the lab where Cash's DNA test was conducted closed during the 2020 pandemic, the results are still unknown. Duane and the authorities expressed their skepticism towards Cash's assertions. Over the years, there hasn't been much development in Dujuan's case. After he vanished, Dujuana relocated to North Carolina, where she got married again and had 2 more kids. We are still no closer to learning the truth about what really happened to her kid, who passed suddenly in December 2020. In an interview with the media, Dujuana expressed her belief that the inquiry had been hampered from the start by racial stereotypes as well as the Susan Smith case, which had a mother who reported her children missing but eventually admitted to killing them a week later. When she was found guilty in 1996 of threatening her husband with 2 knives during a domestic argument, it probably did not improve her reputation. Over the years, numerous sightings of Dujuana have been reported. However, none of them have materialized. Despite Dujuana's passing, the case is still pending, according to the authorities, and they are still looking into it. A lot of theories are being explored online despite the lack of evidence. The majority of people think that Dujuana bears some sort of guilt for her son's misfortune. There have been theories that she either sold or traded Dujuan to pay off debts, that one of her partners was aggressive and injured him, or that he died unintentionally or while being cared for. Some have conjectured that Dujuana suffered from a mental breakdown, or that she abandoned him in the car and was kidnapped from it when she entered the mall. Regretfully, we might never find out what happened to the 4-year-old youngster, especially in light of the glaring absence of tangible proof. There are rumors that the authorities have their own suspicions about what happened to Dujuan, but they won't share them. You can reach the Livonia Police Department at 734-466-2470 if you have any information regarding Dujuan Sims's whereabouts. This year, if Dujuan survives, he will turn 30. Moving on to the next case. Johnny Lewis. Jonathan Kendrick. Lewis was born on October 29, 1983, and raised in Los Angeles. Known by his stage name Johnny Lewis, he was the middle kid of 3 and the ardent follower of Scientology. He moved out of his parents' house to pursue an acting career after high school. Lewis started getting cameo appearances in American drama series in his late teens, such as Malcolm in the Middle and Criminal Minds. He debuted in motion pictures in 2004 as a supporting role in the Hilary Duff movie Raise Your Voice as Engelbert Carey Wilson. He had an appearance in Nick Cannon's action comedy Underclassmen the next year. He starred in the 5th season of Smallville and portrayed Dennis Chili Childress on the OC from 2005 to 2006. Lewis's most well-known performance, meanwhile, came from his part as half-sack Kip Epps in the first 2 seasons of Sons of Anarchy. He made the decision to depart this role in 2009 and requested that the show's script be changed. Kurt Sutter, the show's creator, observed that Johnny wasn't content. He truly wanted to be released from his contract creatively. Lewis's father also submitted a remark telling us he left the show because it was becoming too violent. As an artist, he didn't want to convey that. Following his departure from Sons of Anarchy, Lewis continued to work on his debut novel, which was purportedly about a great musician in San Francisco, while making appearances in a few low-budget and short films. He seemed content to live off the money he had previously made. He learned that his girlfriend was expecting around this time, but the couple had broken up by 2010. For the benefit of their daughter, they tried to cohabitate, but Lewis eventually walked out. The two then got involved in a protracted and agonizing custody dispute, which he finally lost. Lewis lost control of his motorcycle and crashed before the end of October 2011. He was examined by hospital officials for signs of a concussion, but they found none, so he was released. However, the 27-year-old's actions after the accident worried others who knew him. Lewis's father urged him to get more MRIs as his conduct grew more odd and erratic, but Lewis consistently refused. Even worse, he quickly grew violent as a result of his odd conduct. Lewis went for a walk on January 3, 2012, after leaving his Northridge parents' house. He moved across the neighborhood while wearing pajama bottoms and a t-shirt, but he soon heard what he believed to be cries of agony coming from a nearby unit. The house was empty when he made the decision to break in. Two men asked the 27-year-old to leave when they arrived on the scene a little while later. Lewis did not comply. Instead, he pursued the two men with a bottle. He gave them each a blow to the head and got into a physical fight with them, biting one of them in the arm. Eventually, they overcame him and restrained him until the police could get there. Lewis faced charges of assault with a deadly weapon, burglary, and trespassing. He was put in jail despite his claims that he was defending himself. After he apparently tried to jump from the second story of the prison and hit his head on the concrete, he was sent to a psychiatric unit 3 days later. He was placed in mental treatment for 72 hours. His primary complaints on his discharge report were suicide thoughts and blunt head trauma. Lewis was released from custody after 8 days. He had 2 black eyes when he got home. Recalling him, his sister says he appears to be a wounded, shattered animal. His relatives saw that he was averse to light and that he didn't want anyone to touch or approach him. Eventually, he disabled the fuse box in the home so that the lights could never be turned on. Unfortunately, the actor's situation never improved. In the weeks that followed, he made an attempt on his own life, leaving friends and relatives to take turns watching over him and making sure he never went out on his own. After about a month, his family decided he was more stable and gave him permission to live in Santa Monica by himself. However, on February 10th, less than 2 weeks later, he was taken into custody for striking a guy outside a business. He was admitted to the hospital for hypothermia after walking into the Santa Monica Ocean while fully dressed after being freed on bond. He was detained again on February 18th, 1 week later, for trying to break into a woman's house this time. Once more, he was freed on bond. After a few months, friends remarked in May 2012 that they had failed to identify him, characterizing him as having, quote, "a look I've only seen in disturbed veterans of war." His recollections were disorganized. He wavered between simple, coherent speech and incoherence. Lewis was given prescription drugs for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, but he refused to use them. His dad mentioned that he was never given a definitive diagnosis. Did he have an undetected brain injury, or was he suffering from some sort of mental illness? At the time, a probation officer expressed concern for the defendants and the community's welfare, stating that Lewis seemed to be experiencing mental health problems and that he would, quote, "continue to pose a threat to any community in which he may reside." When 28-year-old Johnny Lewis was discovered dead in the writer's villa in Los Angeles on September 26, 2012, the situation eventually came to a head. He had returned to the villa at some time in 2012 after staying at the bed and breakfast in 2009. Actors, writers, and directors were among the rising stars of Hollywood who lived on the 81-year-old Catherine Harris's home. Not only did the police find Lewis at the site, but they also discovered his murdered landlady and her dead cat, which had been dumped on the bathroom floor. After Lewis had viciously attacked the neighbors and they heard Catherine screaming, the LAPD was dispatched to the site. Her left side of her face was completely destroyed during the exceptionally horrific murder, according to the coroner's report, and a subsequent autopsy revealed that she had died from manual strangulation and blunt force injuries to her skull. Her upper jaw was split open, and her nose was split down the middle. Her left face had 4 puncture marks, most likely from the mechanical pencil that was discovered next to her. Lewis, on the other hand, had attacked his neighbors and run back to Catherine's land before plunging through the roof or garage and dying on contact. Despite the theory that he had drug-induced psychosis at the time of the attack due to his history of substance misuse, his autopsy showed that he had neither alcohol nor drugs in his blood when he passed away. Since there was no proof that he had been pushed or that he had jumped from the roof voluntarily, his death was declared accidental. Although the reason for Catherine's attack is unknown, there is a report floating around among her acquaintances that she confronted Louis about cutting off the electricity in her house, which resulted in Louis striking her multiple times before strangling her. Although a hammer was discovered in his room, it's not known if he utilized it. Louis may have kicked Catherine's skull before becoming enraged at her cat, according to investigators' theories. Family members and friends were shocked to learn of Louis's passing and his final acts. Creator of Sons of Anarchy. Kurt Sutter tweeted upon his passing, describing it as a tragic end for a very gifted man who had, regrettably, lost his way. Though I wish I could claim I was taken aback by what happened last night, I wasn't. I sincerely apologize for putting an innocent life in his path of destruction. It's a day of awareness and thanksgiving as well as sadness, yes. Sadly, some of us pass away in order to spread the word. Moving on to the next case. Katrice Lee. Katrice Lee, who was born on November 28, 1979, was her parents' sunshine. Her family lavished her with love and expectation of a happy and prosperous future. In Rinteln, West Germany, at the British Military Hospital, Katrice was born. Katrice was born and raised in Germany for the first 2 years of her existence. Her parents are Richard and Sharon Lee, who are sergeants in the British Army's cavalry unit. She spoke only English at the time of her disappearance, nevertheless. November 28, 1981 was Katrice's second birthday. The family decided to go to the neighboring Naffy shopping center to get supplies for the young girl's birthday. To commemorate the event, Wendy, Sharon's sister, and Cliff, her husband, journeyed to the city. But Katrice's older sister Natasha refused to go shopping. So Wendy, Richard, and Sharon took Katrice along while she stayed home with her uncle Cliff. The mall was a hive of activity because it was the final payday before Christmas. Richard stayed in the car waiting for his wife and sister to finish, while Sharon carried her daughter around instead of sitting in the shopping trolley. The two women arrived at the checkout at last. When Sharon remembered she'd forgotten to buy crisps, she set her daughter down. She went to grab it, believing Wendy would watch over her. But Katrice was gone when the 2-year-old returned. Wendy, meantime, believed the young child had followed her mother down the aisle. It was then that they became aware of Katrice's disappearance. Although the shopping center was in town and not officially on military property, the military police were in charge of the case and had to negotiate with the German civil police. Although Katrice's body was never found in the river, which was eventually dredged, both authorities concurred that she had probably fallen into the neighboring River Lippe and perished. There was no sign of her there either. The Lee family, on the other hand, criticized this hypothesis, questioning how the police could have anticipated a 2-year-old child to walk from one store in a mall all the way outside and into the river. According to reports, the German police declined to share the tale with the media, which heightened tensions between the two agencies, the family and law enforcement. It took 6 weeks for the local paper to publish an article about Katrice. In the early months of the investigation, despite a comprehensive search of the river and door-to-door inquiries, no clues were found, and the case was eventually closed. When officials were able to create a computer-generated image of Katrice at age 21, it was reopened in 2000. Witnesses who had not previously been interrogated, such as a checkout employee and a young man who was in line behind the Lees, came forward as a result of the increased attention the case was receiving. Then a woman spoke up and related a chilling story of her own. The woman claimed that her lover, who served in Katrice's father's unit, had admitted to killing a child. The man was residing in Northumberland at the time that this information became available. The person was questioned by military police, but he refused to answer any questions and denied having anything to do with the disappearance. Not long after closing the case, the woman who had first reported him died. The Lees were informed by law enforcement that the individual was probably a fantasist and had nothing to do with their daughter going missing. Crime Watch and Missing Live 2 BBC programs, both featured Katrice's story. A computerized depiction of the little girl's age 29 adult appearance was displayed on Missing Live. Her older sister, Natasha, made a public information request on Crime Watch. Several leads were followed after receiving tips, but they all ultimately proved fruitless. Richard Lee's answering machine received a message from an unidentified woman after the Crime Watch program, instructing him to search for his daughter in France. Nothing more came of the audio, even though the authorities kept it in their custody to look into the caller and the lead. Law enforcement investigated the possibility that Katrice had been taken from the complex and taken to another family, potentially in the UK, Germany, or another part of Europe. Most likely, she had no idea who she really was. Due to Katrice's rare birth defect, which would have required 2 surgeries for her left eye, medical professionals who were aware of such procedures were asked to come forward if they had performed one on a kid. However, it seems that this lead has unfortunately not progressed. The German civil police and the British military police declared in April 2018 that they would be conducting a 5-week forensic search along the river's banks. However, this tragically did not yield any fresh data. A former serviceman in Swindon was detained in September 2019 in relation to the case, and his property was searched. However, he was later freed. After posing as Katrice online and getting in touch with the family, a 40-year-old woman entered a guilty plea to a malicious communications charge 1 month later, in October 2019. She received a restraining order prohibiting her from contacting the family, an 18-week jail sentence, and mental health treatment. When an e-fit, an electronic facial recognition method, of a man the police wanted to speak to was revealed in 2017, that was the sole real lead in Katrice's case. This man was allegedly saw entering a green saloon car with a young child at the time the 2-year-old went missing. Authorities looked into the riverside the following year after seeing a car similar to the one that vanished in the days that followed. To the dismay of the Lee family, officials declared in December 2020 that they would be reducing the scope of the inquiry. The police informed Richard that they would look into the matter further only in the event that fresh evidence sprang up. Over the past 40 years, Richard has been outspoken about how the first investigation into his daughter's disappearance was flawed since he feels that she was abducted. "I think this whole investigation has been a complete and utter sham," he declared. He also mentioned that interviewing checkout staff took 6 weeks. Additionally, it took 20 years in one instance before the subject was questioned. He added that it had taken 48 hours for border control to be notified that a youngster was missing. And before sniffer dogs were brought in, a whole day passed. The investigation has been severely criticized overall since it took 36 years to release the suspect's e-fit, and numerous important witness interviews were postponed. Katrice's case remains unresolved, and she remains missing. Richard Lee, who is 71 years old, and his family members are still actively involved in the fight for justice. Katrice will be 42 years old if she survives. If you know anything about her possible location, please give 0800-616-888 a call. Moving on to the next case. Louise Porton. In the 999 emergency contact number, Louise Porton reported that her 3-year-old daughter, Lexi Draper, was unconscious and not breathing on January 15, 2018. Louise seemed unnervingly calm when the paramedics arrived, despite the seriousness of the situation. They saw a terrifying sight as they hurried to help Lexi. Her jaw was squeezed shut, her skin tinted blue, her body motionless. They tried desperately, but it was too late. The tragedy continued even after the 3-year-old was declared dead at the scene. 18 days later, Louise called the 111 Care Advice number again, reporting that Scarlett Vaughn, her 17-month-old daughter, was not breathing. Why did Porton use 111, a non-emergency number, instead of 999 in such a dire situation? Was she acting out of a sense of duty, or did she believe the numbers were the same? A closer examination of Louise's past was necessitated by the suspicions raised by the murders of her children. A darker side of Louise's past emerged when investigators dug further. In the UK, Louise Porton was born in the town of Wall, which is outside of Birmingham, in 1996. Along with her mother, Sharon Porton, and her 2 siblings, she was raised. Louise's family had difficulties with her behavior even as a small child. Although Louise's family was close-knit, she frequently stood out by herself and exhibited crafty and manipulative tendencies. She would frequently tell falsehoods to her parents in an effort to control her brothers and cousins and get them into trouble. Notably, Louise frequently threatened her siblings and relatives with bodily harm. She also behaved violently with them. Louise's relationships with her family, particularly her mother, worsened as she became older. Louise's bitterness against her mother had grown as a result of her affair and leaving when she was a teenager. Although her siblings continued to communicate with their mother, Louise had severed all connections. Louise's behavior grew worse as she approached adolescence. She was in constant conflict with her family, skipped school, and even ran afoul of the law. She is said to have acted coldly and selfishly, in addition to stealing. Louise's seeming promiscuity also became a major problem. She was attracted to guys and frequently used physical contact as a ruse to get presents and cash. She carried on with this conduct into adulthood, taking it online and interacting with other guys in exchange for cash and presents. Louise was also active on the internet, sharing pictures to draw attention from guys. She participated in a variety of cosplay activities, dressing up in various costumes and exchanging presents or cash for pictures. Her pictures started to get more explicit over time, and she started calling herself a model. Lewis registered with multiple modeling agencies, Purpleport being one of them. However, there are online reports that cast doubt on Purpleport's credibility due to the possibility that it is being utilized for exploitative purposes. Louise chased modeling prospects and provided intimate services to photographers for payment, even though there could have been risks involved. Apart from her modeling pursuits, Louise became a mother in late 2014, when she gave birth to her first child, Lexi, at the age of 18. She maintained her lifestyle, though, and did not settle down. Louise was a mother, but she also didn't get along well with Chris Draper, Lexi's father. Louise also had problems with her family, which were made worse by her actions on the internet and her inability to put her daughter's welfare first. Louise's refusal to visit or go to the burial after her grandma passed away caused her to become even more distant from her family. Despite these problems, Louise and Lexi's father had another kid, Scarlett, when she was 20 years old. Louise started acting in a way that worried the kids more and more as they got older. She looked for casual encounters and made money from these interactions by spending hours each day on dating apps and websites. Often, Louise would leave her kids with friends or alone at home with her landlady while she went out to socialize. The kids ended up spending more time with the landlady than their own mother as a result of this. The situation worsened as Louise started to view her children as a burden in her life, especially when it came to her physical exploits. In some cases, she even brought these men back to her home, putting her children in danger. Family members and acquaintances had grown increasingly concerned about the safety and welfare of Lexi and Scarlett. They had reported Louise to social services, but nothing was done. Louise's relationship with Chris Draper, the father of her children, remained tense as her life kept getting out of hand. She even went so far as to give Scarlett a new last name, Vaughn, in order to prevent him from having any communication with either Lexi or Scarlett. When Louise made the decision to relocate the family to Skiddaw Rugby, an hour's drive from Chris, so severing his connection to his kids, the situation took a dire turn. Karen Porton, Louise's sister, had also made an effort to lend assistance and support whenever she could. But Louise's priorities stayed misaligned. Several of the men she hung out with were obviously inappropriate. One even called her kids babies. Family members kept talking to Louise about their anxieties, but she laughed it off and even made fun of the circumstance. Many have theorized that Louise may have drugged her kids to unconsciousness so she could focus on her own hobbies. After their mother left them to fend for themselves, the cruelty and neglect that followed in 2017 took a toll on Lexi and Scarlett. Louise's mental health declined along with her relationship with her kids. She started to become more combative and verbally abusive, snapping at her kids for even the smallest infractions. She frequently used physical force on Lexi and Scarlett, hitting them in order to control their behavior and mask their screams. Social services kept failing to step in, allowing Louise to carry on with her harmful behavior. Louise had come to a somber conclusion and made a plan to free herself from the burden her children had become, since she was still consumed by her own ambitions and unable to handle the obligations of motherhood. In an email to her sister on January 2, 2018, Louise expressed concern that Lexi might be having a tantrum. But Louise didn't call until after Lexi's condition had gotten much worse. Even after Lexi was released from the hospital, Louise's negligence persisted, since she was more preoccupied with her dating life than her daughter's well-being. In the meantime, Louise's Google searches revealed to the detectives a more sinister reality. She had looked up information on kid breathlessness, asphyxia, and how it may be fatal. Gradually, the detectives began to understand that her Google searches were motivated by something more sinister than true concern. Sadly, on January 4, 2018, just 2 days later, Lexi became gravely ill, and Louise contacted 999 to report that her daughter had stopped breathing. Her cold manner during the call, though, had cast even more doubt on her honesty. Lexi's lips, fingers, and eyes had turned blue, and she was in critical condition when paramedics arrived. She had clearly been in the state before Louise had finally made the decision to seek assistance, revealing the depth of Louise's disregard and callousness for her daughter's life. The paramedics were at a loss as to how a healthy little girl like Lexi could suddenly have 2 potentially fatal events in such a short amount of time. Louise stayed at the hospital for Lexi's 4-day stay, taking advantage of the chance to flirt with hospital workers and send guys sexual images and texts of herself. The only diagnosis the doctors could make after Lexi was released from the hospital was that she might have had a chest infection. After bringing Lexi back home, Louise's cold-blooded and deceptive behavior persisted. The hotel's CCTV film showed Louise and the kids leaving the hospital and coming home, and even at this point it was evident from her demeanor that she didn't want to raise her kids. She claimed she needed money to care for Lexi, so she took advantage of her daughter's health problems to ask men for money. Louise started searching for self-harming techniques and details on life support and death on Google, which raised more alarming questions. It became clear that her study was focused on finding a covert manner to kill her daughter. Investigators have reviewed the searches she conducted on January 2nd and 4. Louise also started to focus her Google searches on when to call emergency services after killing someone, which made them more focused over time. She had even looked up the duration needed for suffocation to cause a body to turn blue. This disclosed her goal to make sure that, even after killing her daughter, she could still call 999 without risking her life. Louise persisted in lying to men about her daughter's illness, saying that she was dying from the flu, despite her horrible intentions. Her lack of empathy and her willingness to use people to further her own dark agenda seemed to have no boundaries. The unfortunate event occurred on January 14, 2018, after Lexi and Scarlett paid a visit to Karen, Louise's sister. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Lexi's condition abruptly declined once more. Louise claimed her daughter was unconscious and not breathing when she contacted 9999. Lexi was unconscious and showing symptoms of rigor mortis when paramedics arrived, suggesting that she had probably been dead for several hours prior to the emergency call. At the scene, Lexi was pronounced dead despite their best efforts. Louise persisted in her deceptive ways even after losing her daughter, which was devastating. The very following day, it was discovered that she had accepted 41 friend requests on her dating app and had taken advantage of Lexi's passing to ask men for money. She even created a GoFundMe page for her daughter's burial, possibly with the intention of using the money raised for herself. Her fake post on Facebook about Lexi revealed even more of her lack of real sorrow. Louise was observed joking and laughing with friends in the days after Lexi's passing, even during her daughter's funeral. However, things didn't end there. To Scarlett's mother, she was burdensome and no different from Lexi. Following Lexi's passing, Louise's mother showed up at the funeral and offered to assist with the funeral arrangements. Louise apparently expressed concern that Scarlett would suffer the same fate as Lexi, but nobody reported her questionable actions to the police. 18 days later, on February 1st, her words came to pass. Scarlett was fine while Louise and her remained in a motel room, but things took a turn for the worse. Sending messages to the men she was meeting, Louise requested A30 to cover the expense of petrol so she could take Scarlett to the hospital. Louise just wanted attention and money, even though these men were urging her to call for an ambulance. Louise and Scarlett left the hotel around 9:50 p.m., but she did not head straight to the hospital. Rather, she took her time driving around town, behaving as though her daughter's life was not in jeopardy. She was observed driving throughout the city without intending to call the helplines, according to surveillance footage captured during traffic stops at Hill Morton. When she pulled into a petrol station, she was captured on camera. In the video, Louise is seen in the car taking her sweet time while her daughter is fighting to die. Her expression and actions show no signs of urgency or anxiety. After driving up to a retail complex, she finally arrived after 30 minutes and dialed 111. She still decided to call 111 even though 9999 is the emergency helpline number and 111 is the non-emergency hotline for those outside of the UK. Scarlett was found dead and motionless when the paramedics came. Once more, it was found that the infant had not been breathing for several hours prior to Louise making the call for assistance. Louise once more exhibited little worry about the unexpected and unexplained death, even though the doctors concluded that the death was compatible with intentional airway obstruction. The doctors were unable to identify any natural explanation for why either youngster would have passed away in this way. In the meantime, Louise said Scarlett had the illness when the paramedics questioned him. Post-mortem exams were carried out by forensic professionals in the cases of Lexi and Scarlett. It was discovered that their deaths were not accidents, but deliberate. Deliberate restriction of Lexi's airways caused her death. Examiners discovered scratches on her neck, showing that she was resisting her mother's hands while Louise choked her, and markings on her nose, suggesting that her nose was held shut. Scarlett, who was 17 months old, also passed away due to airway blockage. She had blood in her lungs, injury to the muscles in her neck, and bruises all over her head and neck. Additionally, a portion of Scarlett's blood was discovered on the hotel room pillow where she passed away. Louise had never expressed regret or acknowledged her acts, even in the face of overwhelming proof. Despite the lack of sufficient evidence to make an official arrest of Louise at the time, detectives persisted in their investigation, certain that Louise was the one guilty for the deaths of these defenseless youngsters. In January 2019, over a year later, authorities were able to accuse her for the killings of her two children once they had acquired sufficient evidence. And Louise was detained on March 20, 2019. Her trial started in August 2019 after she entered a not guilty plea. A plethora of evidence was used against her, including the outcomes of the post-mortem examinations, her careless behavior toward her children, and her communication history on dating apps. August 3, 2019. The jury returned a guilty verdict. In the end, Louise Porton received a 32-year prison sentence. Given her young age at the time of sentencing, many people feel that this punishment is insufficient. Since she is only 23 years old, there are worries that if she does well in prison, she could be released early. She was heartless and showed no regret during the trial. She did not feel guilty about killing her own children, she just stood there. Though there are many theories, Louise's motivation for acting as she did is still unknown. She had a mental health assessment, but no diagnosis was determined. At the time of the killings, she was considered to be of sound mind. The widely held belief is that Louise chose to have her children removed because she considered them to be burdens, particularly in light of her immoral lifestyle. Everyone involved in this case was horrified by the case's outcome. Sharon Porton, Louise's mother, experienced a severe depressive episode because she believed she could have done more to support her two young grandchildren. Sadly, she committed suicide on February 4, 2020, and her body was discovered inside her home. She was 40 years old. Chris, the girl's father, too, went through a great deal of suffering. He conveyed remorse and annoyance, believing he could have taken more action to seek custody when the chance presented itself. Even now, 18 months after the sisters' deaths, The grief of never having met his 17-month-old daughter Scarlett dominates his every thought. A white horse-drawn carriage decorated with purple was set up to take the victims, Lexi Draper and Scarlett Vaughn, described as two lovely girls with contagious grins and lively personalities, to their eternal resting place in honor of them. Their premature demise ended lives full of limitless potential. Moving on to the next case. Vince Neal. Vincent Neal Wharton was born on February 8, 1961, and moved around Southern California a lot as a child. Despite being born in Hollywood, California, he briefly lived in Inglewood and Watts until his family moved to Glendora, a city in Los Angeles County. He had a wide range of interests as a young youngster. He was a huge fan of music, baseball, wrestling, and surfing. Neal joined the now famous heavy metal band Motley Crue in 1981. The band had just been formed and was still getting established. Since then, Motley Crue has grown to become one of the most well-known metal bands worldwide, with over 100 million records sold and 7 platinum or multi-platinum certifications under their belt. It was drummer Tommy Lee Bass who first noticed Neal. They had been classmates, and Bass believed he would be a great addition to the band. Their debut album was recorded in 1981, and their second in 1983. Shout at the Devil, their entry, was what made them famous, wealthy, and helped them establish their legendary position. But as the group became more well-known, Neal and his friends started to lose it. They gained notoriety in the 1980s, along with many other musicians of the era, for their drug use, particularly their use of heroin, cocaine, and LSD. Nikki Sixx, the band's co-founder and bassist, eventually developed an addiction to the latter. Neal acknowledged in many later interviews that he had battled with cocaine and heroin addiction since his drug usage problems had begun, long before he joined the band. His extensive drug usage eventually landed him and his bandmates in rehab. Hanoi Rocks was a rising Finnish rock band in the early 1980s, the first to actually chart in the UK. The people of Japan loved them. They were predicted by many to take the world by storm. They started in 1979 and released their 5th album in 1984. Music journalist Ian Fortnam described the second track, which was starting to climb the charts, as an eye-searing flash of exaggerated technicolor in an otherwise dull and uninteresting world. Up until it all fell apart, Hanoi Rocks were destined for nothing less than grandeur. After selling out 2 performances in Los Angeles in less than 20 minutes, Hanoi Rocks embarked on their second U.S. tour in December 1984. On December 8th, a few band members, including drummer Nicholas Razzle Dingley, who was absent because frontman Michael Monroe was recuperating from an ankle fracture, visited Redondo Beach resident Vincent Neal. Neal and Razzle had spent most of their time together partying, so they got into Neal's car and went to a nearby store to buy more booze. But Neal was operating the vehicle while intoxicated, and it didn't take long for the journey to spiral out of control when he lost control and collided with an approaching car. Razzle was the victim of the greatest loss, passing away at the scene, while the occupants of the second car suffered severe injuries, including brain damage. Neal, meanwhile, sustained minor facial injuries and a few cracked ribs. Following this, Neal was charged with vehicular manslaughter and driving while intoxicated. At the time, the legal limit in California for blood alcohol content was 0.10, but Neal's level was 0.17, significantly higher. He received a sentence of 5 years of probation and 30 days in jail in December 1985. He was also mandated to perform 200 hours of community service and pay $2,600,000 in restitution to the crash victims. In barely 2 weeks, he received parole due to his good behavior. Despite the fact that this is Neal's greatest transgression to date, he has a long history of run-ins with the law and has been convicted of crimes before. He was taken into custody in 2002 after hitting a record producer in a nightclub parking lot. He was taken into custody for attacking a sex worker in Nevada the next year. He got into a fight that left a sound man unconscious between 2004 and 2016, was charged with battery and disorderly conduct after fighting with his ex-girlfriend, was sued for fraud, and was charged with battery once more after assaulting a woman in Las Vegas who had approached him for a picture. According to reports, Nicolas Cage, an actor, restrained him. Theater of Pain, Motley Crue's third album, was devoted to Razzle. In the meanwhile, Hanoi Rocks failed to go on after losing their drummer, and they broke up in 1985. Lead guitarist Andy McCoy and lead vocalist Michael Monroe finally got back together. However, after 8 years together, this new combination disbanded in 2009. Several of the original band members, such as McCoy, have expressed their displeasure and rage at Neil's act's potential legal repercussions, saying, quote, "It was a crime." Razzle wasn't the first young person to suffer a crippling. This boy also spent one night in jail for a misdemeanor, but was freed. McCoy has also expressed his annoyance at Neil not apologizing, although other members of Motley Crue have. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.